Toronto Centre is the densest ward in the city of Toronto. It's one of the densest areas of land in all of North America, in fact. It presents a set of unique challenges and opportunities. That's why I thought it was important to get Councillor Chris Moise onto Toronto The Politics The Show. That conversation now. Councillor Chris Moise, Ward 13, Toronto Centre, thank you so much for coming on to Toronto The Politics The Show today. Thanks for having me, by the way. Where are we, might I ask?
So we're in my immediate office. I spend a lot of time in this space. It's my home away from home.
You were telling me about the painting behind you. Where does this depict?
So this is actually Parliament Street, I think back in 1934. They're having a street party. It's in my ward, and I have a few paintings in the office that are actually in the ward itself.
And it's lovely to see how street festivals in Toronto have such a rich history. You know, they're not some novel invention. It's something that's been core to Toronto for so long. Something that I've been very impressed by in your ward has been the Church Street pedestrianization. I had the chance to have Rodney Chan on the show a couple weeks back. How's that going, by the way? How would you say residents are responding to Church Street pedestrianization? Are you hearing anything from business owners? How's it going?
It's going very well. You know, when I first got elected back in 2022, one of my commitments was actually to have more pedestrianization in the ward. 3 years ago, I pedestrianized Market Street, and so it's one of the most vibrant areas of the city already, but having it pedestrianized actually will make it more vibrant, and people want it to be permanent. Church Street is something I've always wanted to do. I went to St. Catherine Street in Montreal 20 plus years ago and experienced, you know, the beauty and the experience of pedestrianization for the first time. And I thought to myself, you know, we should have this in Toronto, right? And so I tried my best to see how this could happen here. And I've had a lot of pushback from staff over the years, but with Rodney's help, I was able to actually help navigate how to make that happen. And so it took us 8 months to finally get it approved by city staff. I had a lot of naysayers. You know, Toronto Police, Transportation, and others were saying, you know, it can't happen, it shouldn't happen. We don't have a means to make this happen here in the city. And so I actually had to force the issue. And I canvassed every business within the pedestrianization to get their support and, you know, their feedback, their wants and not wants. I worked with them directly and worked with the Resident Association, the 519, Pride Toronto and others. And everybody was really enthused about it. And it actually happened.
And the feedback, I think, has been so positive that it has inspired. There was a new bylaw passed, correct, that would provide a pathway for further pedestrianization. Is that correct?
Well, Councillor Matlow and I actually put a motion forth together to actually look into pedestrianizing other parts of the city and how to make it happen. And I have a lot of positive feedback from other wards looking at the project itself to see how it's make it more feasible. And so I'm hoping that will be a positive outcome. We do have help from 880 cities that's actually collecting data over the 9 weeks of the pedestrianization to see, you know, what works and what doesn't work. And we also have other city departments also looking at it as well. And we also do check-ins with the businesses and the resident association to see, like, you know, if there are things we can actually change or, you know, what works and doesn't work. But I have to say to you, though, that the feedback we've received from the community so far, the businesses specifically, is that they've actually, in the first week of the pedestrianization, it's been the best week they've had all year in all the weeks prior to that in 2026. So those who were like on the fence are actually on board now. Again, the only criticism I've had from the community so far is that they want it longer in the sense of the stretch of Church Street, and they want it all summer. So that to itself is very positive. We do have QR codes on the street itself. And to my surprise, many people actually use the QR code and provide their feedback to us as well. And 99% of the feedback has been positive. So the thing with the pedestrianization of Church Street, you know, it changes from the morning, the afternoon, and night, right? It's a different vibe each and every time. But it's always active, right? Very engaging. And people come from across the city to experience it for themselves, and they all love it. So, it's heartwarming to actually see it and experience it myself.
It's what I think our streets are really meant for, which is community. And when you give people the ability to connect and to celebrate and experience joy together, you immediately become an advocate for it, just like you in Montreal, experience pedestrianization and then come here and do it. I think that it's one of those things I think a lot of people are skeptical of until they experience, which is a shame because, I think with so many street festivals that occur, we can all look around and see that, you close down any street, they become packed. The whole city flocks to any pedestrianized street. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where only a couple of these streets are ever pedestrianized on any given weekend. And I think that often leads to overwhelming crowds, areas where safety does maybe become an issue. And I wonder if we had more pedestrianized streets, if it wasn't, a couple of streets every weekend, I think that probably crowds would be a lot more manageable because they would be diffused through many different streets. It feels like the demand is there.
Yeah, the demand is definitely there. We experienced that, even at this distillery, right? We experienced that wherever there's a street closure, people tend to gather. And I think too, when you actually pedestrianize a street, it actually makes it safer because there's no cars. Yeah. People don't have to look behind them left and right to see if there's a car coming, and they have to compete with the vehicles. So it's definitely very positive. Even during FIFA, for example, we've had to actually close down many streets in the West End around the FIFA. And people knowing that, there'll be a lot of crowds gathered, they actually took transit. Yeah. Right. So again, people would change their behavior if they know in advance that certain things are happening. And even around the Church Street pedestrianization, we've seen that the traffic flow around the area has changed too, because people know that, it's closed for 9 weeks. And they'll take transit, they'll walk, they'll bike to get around. I think we need to be more bold in the city of Toronto and not be afraid to actually make changes that will actually benefit the residents. I've often said that, Toronto is a community of neighborhoods. People actually live here, right? And they want to, engage their communities in different ways. One of the problems we have in Toronto Centre is that people drive in and drive out. They don't recognize that, this is a community of neighborhoods. We have many schools here in the core. We have, seniors' homes in our streets, and people, go to the grocery store. So when you're driving in the morning to come to work and driving out in the evening, people forget to slow down. There's been many fatalities as a result of that, right? And I've had to actually had to take steps. Am I going too quickly here?
No, it's great. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't ask me a question anymore. I'm just sort of going.
It's all good.
Okay.
You're not the first politician I've spoken with.
Where should I start again? Sorry.
So we're talking about safety in Toronto, and I think you're getting at a very important point where when we talk about safety, it feels like the conversation's maybe not expansive for what the true risks for most people in the city of Toronto. Yeah. You're far more likely to experience an injury because a driver has collided with you, maybe, making a legal right turn, or, speeding because speeding has, essentially been legalized in downtown Toronto. Those are the true safety issues that most people are experiencing. And yet it feels like that is not necessarily reaching much of the media coverage right now.
Yeah, a lot of the media coverage about, how congested the downtown core is, how congested Toronto is since post-COVID. The data has shown that post-COVID, there are more cars on the road than ever before, right? But yet the infrastructure is somewhat the same, right? The one thing that has changed is that we have to create more transit. We now have 6 lines in Toronto. We've increased more trains on line 1 and line 2. We've had more buses, right? More frequent buses, more bus routes. So we are trying to encourage people to take transit more, but there is a reluctance. And as I've mentioned, since FIFA, we've recognized that there's more people taking transit as a result of that, and we hope that it continues. During my tenure as a councillor and since Mayor Chow has been here, we've actually hired 127 more traffic wardens to help traffic flow, especially in intersections. But it's also important to know that Toronto is a city of neighborhoods. People who live here tend to walk or bike, in their neighborhoods. But Toronto Centre, the population of Toronto Centre triples in size every day. And for obvious reasons, we have the part of the financial district here. We have the St. Lawrence Market. We have many theaters. We have the Eden Center and others, right? So it's a destination, and we want people to come. But we want them to also respect that, people live here and you need to slow down. In my tenure as councillor, I've actually installed 24 traffic signal lights here just to make sure that people walk across the street safely.
One of the defining political cleavages, it feels like in Toronto, is between people who drive and people who don't. And it does seem like there's a central tension sometimes that, there's only so much land to go around. Are we going to put a bike lane here? Are we going to pedestrianize it? Are we going to, add an additional lane? How do you, is Toronto Centre, where does it land in terms of density? I would imagine it's one of the densest wards in the city, right?
It is very dense. There's 120,000 people actually who live here, right? So per square area, it's actually one of the smallest, but it's a vertical ward, right? Many high rises here. So
how do you consider that? How do you balance the needs of drivers versus the needs of those who don't drive? How do you think about that?
Well, many people in Toronto Centre actually don't drive, and a lot of the buildings that are going up now actually have no parking. They have bike parking, not car parking, right? So again, Toronto Centre is considered a transit-oriented ward, so people are encouraged to actually walk or bike, and use other means, but not drive, and which is great. But people who come to the city, and drive through it need to drive with care. Since I've been a councillor, we've had many deaths of pedestrians and cars here, right? By cars. This office has been very engaged in actually trying to, bury people, I'm going to say, right? And have wakes and so on and so forth. There's a lot of Muslims who live in Toronto Centre, so you have to bury them in a certain time period. So we have to get the permits and so on and so forth, right? And for me as a councillor, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that. And so I've had to actually, work with community to ensure that our streets are safe, right? Our kids who are going to school cross the street safely. Our seniors are able to cross the street, without having to worry about being run over. Even changing the flow of the traffic signal lights, it slows down, right? So people have time to cross. All these things, I've had to mitigate because people just speed in and out of the ward, which is problematic.
And it does feel like there's a class divide where, by definition, if you're someone who is driving a large SUV in downtown Toronto, you're probably making some more money, you probably have better political connections, better media connections, and you're probably having your voice heard a lot more than the person who's maybe a newer immigrant into Toronto who, hasn't learned about the deputization process to come and speak about how different road closures are being affecting their commute. And it's unfortunate where we feel like we only see one side of the story. Representing a ward that is so diverse, how do you think, as city councillor, how do you view your role? How can you help uplift voices and do effective community engagement to ensure that some of those underrepresented voices are heard more often?
Well, again, Toronto Centre is a very diverse ward, probably the most diverse ward in the entire city. And so I go in with intention into certain communities to elevate their voices. Also creating safe spaces as well, so people can tell their truths, because people will not speak up, if they feel that there's louder voices in the room. So I create safe spaces for people, and that helps. It's like even going to the mosque, for example, right, or the community center, or sometimes even to someone's private home, just to have a conversation with a few of their neighbors. That really does make a difference. And so
I imagine what's often difficult as councillor, and I would like to ask you just kind of the more human question about what it's like to have the job, is that it seems like in a lot of conversations, people lead with anger. And, look, these are fundamental issues when it comes to housing, when it comes to transportation. People have a lot of deep emotions. But I find in my experience, when people lead with aggression, lead with skepticism, it's impossible to have actually an effective conversation. What's that been like for you as a city councillor? Why... To ask maybe a basic question, like, why be a city councillor? Because it seems like a very stressful job. I'm not sure if you've noticed this. You got a lot of grief. You got people, yelling at you constantly. People show up at your place of business on a daily basis. What is that like, and why pursue this as a thing to do with your life? Why be a city councillor?
Well, I've been a public servant my entire life, right? Prior to being in this office, I was a social worker in a local hospital for 22 years. And my specialty is addictions and mental health. And, part of my job then was actually listening to people, right, as to their life experiences. Because not everybody, was born homeless or was born an addict. There's something in their life journey that got them to this point. And listening to them and understanding their life circumstance really helped me to help them. And a big part about this job as being a city councillor is actually listening to people. I think people just want to be heard, quite frankly. They're frustrated in the moment. They feel they're not being listened to or respected. And for me, 50% of calming people down is actually just showing up, right, and listening to them. And once, I've heard what they have to say, then we can actually move on from it and try to deal with the issue that they're faced with. And normally people walk away feeling, satisfied. Again, there's a lot of systemic issues in our system that needs to be addressed and changed. And so the collective voice individually helps me make a systemic change. And that's what I try to do.
I think there's often an attitude amongst some people who don't understand how decisions are made. So instead they seek to point fingers and stomp their feet. There's a real energy of, teacher, why do we have to do homework?
Yeah.
I'll never use math, and rather than admit that, you're ignorant about a certain subject, I think there's a lot of pointing fingers and trying to say that there's some failure amongst a politician. But really, I think a lot of that just comes from not understanding what's going on. I think a big reason why I wanted to even do, speak with you and do this show generally is because it's so rare for us to hear from our councillors thinking through how they make their decisions. There's, we've all been clipped and tweeted into oblivion such that you never get a chance to actually explain yourself anymore. And you combine that with, a local news media, which is, and shitification is the term I would use. You sell more ads, make worse quality product. And then what ends up happening is you encourage a very reactionary approach to politics. And I think where I've seen that most explicitly has been with, the drug toxicity crisis, which is affecting our streets. I think we can all see that there are people suffering on our city streets. And I can imagine for many people, it is, an uncomfortable thing to witness. And maybe it does put you in a situation where there are feelings of unsafety. Why do you think this is happening? Why do you think there are people on our streets? Can you point towards any policy decisions which have led to some folks suffering on our streets? And what would you like to see done to help people get the help they need?
So I've often said that addictions is healthcare, mental health is healthcare. And healthcare is a provincial responsibility, right? And we've seen over the last many years that the province have actually cut funding to these services. Like when I was a healthcare worker calling around for a detox bed, there was never a bed available. If you want a long-term treatment bed, it's almost a 2-year wait. So I think it's disingenuous for the province to say, seek treatment, and when people do, it's not available. And people tend to migrate to where the services are at. And historically, a lot of those services have been in Toronto, and more specifically in Toronto Centre. So people come here. Like when I was at the hospital, people used to get off the Greyhound bus across the street here, with a suitcase and go to the hospital looking for help. It was my job at the time to help them. And things have actually gotten a lot worse since I've left the healthcare field. And now, as chair of Board of Health, I really see the systemic inequities in the system, right? I was pointing the finger at the individual, not the system itself. And that is a problem. And of course, the city, we don't have the tools to actually address it in a real, tangible way that will actually help everybody. The only tool that we have at the city and we use to the best of our ability, is actually providing housing with wraparound services. Because when people cannot access care, they then go into the parks and the laneways and they encamp. And of course, the public only sees that and says, "Councillor, deal with it. Why are you making this happen? Why are you encouraging or tolerating that?" But there are different things that which is difficult, because the provincial courts have said to us, well, you can actually displace people from a park if you don't have any indoor spaces to put them in, right? So again, there's a bottleneck in the system in regards to even shelter and permanent housing for people. So I have to actually, with intent, work with them in the parks and get them to safe housing. So it's frustrating, it's difficult. And I remind people as well in that I cannot prevent people from coming into the city of Toronto, right? This is Canada, people have rights. And so they migrate and move where the services are at. And also too, our staff cannot actually forcefully move people indoors. So we have to continue to build that trust and that relationship and encourage them to actually go to an appropriate indoor space.
And I think there's been a long-term dynamic in Toronto where definitely the suburban wards, the wealthier wards, have been very effective advocates to prevent any sort of supportive housing, any sort of health care. And what occurs is that these services end up being localized, centralized in a couple of wards where, the representatives are maybe a little more empathetic, maybe have a little bit more of a pro-science perspective as to how to treat people effectively. But because then the dynamics of scale, it can make the appearance of this one ward as being a hot spot, when really the problem isn't that, we're helping people. The problem is that you're not helping people where you are. So we have a lot on our plate in this central area.
Exactly. So 62% of social services has historically been here in Toronto Centre. And it's actually gotten a lot worse in regards to people coming here, since COVID and post-COVID, right? So one of the things I appreciate now is that we've delegated the responsibility of creating housing and shelter services to staff. Before, the councillor had a say as to whether they wanted one in their area or not. And that's one of the reasons why, the system is so upside down. So now staff is trying to right size it by creating more housing in Etobicoke, North York, and elsewhere, Scarborough, right? And not as much in the downtown core.
Because also there's a dynamic, where just like in any other dense area, when you have a community a large amount, you also get people who are trying to take advantage of them, and I think there's this unfortunate thing. One of the worst trends I feel like I've noticed as of late is filming someone who's experiencing a drug overdose and publishing it online as some, oh, look, Toronto's going down, it's a hellhole. It feels like there's a more fundamental issue, which is, so many of these people clearly have never had someone in their family or life who's experienced a substance issue, because they treat it as a moral failing instead of a failing of healthcare, and people who are really suffering. How do you feel about that? How do you think that, we can talk policy, and I think you and I would agree, and, we're unlike some, mayoral candidates who try to just deny any sort of data collection or any sort of social science whatsoever. We can talk policy, but I think at the foundation of that is that we have empathy for people who are suffering. My big concern right now is it feels like empathy is disappearing. People just don't care for one another. I mean, I'm not going to ask you how to, heal the human consciousness of the earth, but what do you view as the role of politician to help recognize the shared humanity amongst the people who live in your ward and across the city? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are leaders, right, in this city, and it's important to, look at everyone as valued members of our citizens, right? And those who are struggling, we should hold them up and support them, not villainize them as some has done, right? They could, the person on the street could be your brother, your sister, your kid, and an uncle, right? They're neighbors, and we have to treat them as such, right? And I feel that we've lost that, which is really very sad to see. But the story that's not being told, though, is that most overdoses that happen, or even overdose deaths for that matter, happen in the condos and the apartments and even Rosedale. A lot of that, I would say maybe 70, I think the quote I received was 76% of those overdoses happen in people's homes. But because we only see the ones in the street, that's what we focus on, right? So the issue is the drugs, period, and examining the drugs, right? The drugs is different in every part of the city, so we need to actually test the drugs in public health to make sure that we know how to actually respond and help those that are in crisis, be it, up in the towers or in the park. Every life is valuable. And so that's what I'm trying to do, and trying to bring attention to some of these issues. It's all hands on deck for me as chair of Board of Health, and we've put every resource available to helping people, period.
And I'm sure it's 1,000 small things that can be done to help provide, a system where you're more aware of what's going on and then are therefore able to treat things. How do you think the closure of safe consumption sites has affected this dynamic? I can imagine that was a pretty important data collection location to just understand what sort of substances were out there. How do you think the closure of so many of those sites has affected Toronto?
Well, again, as chair of Board of Health, I receive the stats every month. And I can say to you, and I get the stats from across the city, not just from my ward. And I can say to you that the rates are up substantially, right? Overdoses are up substantially. The use, even the used harm reduction things are now across the city, right? Because people, now the entire city is a supervised consumption site. We find these things in the laneways, the school grounds, the parks, everywhere. We actually keep track of how many are collected in the city. And I can say to you that, it's mind-boggling how much of those we pick up every day now.
If you don't like seeing, needles on your sidewalk, I think a good thing you'd want would be a safe consumption site nearby. But when people don't have a place to do it safely, then what happens is they're in the street instead.
Exactly. But it's important to note, though, that SCS sites is not only where people go and do drugs. There are provide women's care, wound care, counseling, and also it's a safe space for people because the people who are underhoused don't have safe spaces. And so they build relationships with the staff in those SCS sites, right? And that's why they go there. Even when the site is closed, they're hanging around the doorsteps because they know staff will be coming eventually. It's a safe space for them. So it's just not what you think it is. It's so much more. And it's important to note that people didn't actually use those sites very often initially, right? Because they didn't feel they were safe spaces. We had to build that trust with them. And once you build it, then you're able to provide the services. And actually, you could actually move them into other programs, withdrawal management, or if they want to go to a doctor or even housing, right? All these things are being provided in those spaces. Not just, they go there and do drugs. It's foolish to think that's all that happens there. And so this is why we've tried so hard to say to the government, if you're not going to fund it as an SCS site, at least keep it open as a center where some of the services can continue.
I had a great conversation with a local advocate and support worker, Norad Bouzaid, that's going to be releasing pretty soon. And, they're a former addict, and they work at a support site. And to think that they might be the only person that an addict can speak with who understands and is past, that difficult period of their time. And absent giving someone that opportunity to have that conversation, you might never learn some of the tangible things to improve your station. You instead, and especially as we other addicts and we other people who are suffering, there's a schism in our society where you only end up getting to speak with those who are in the same place you are and never actually get the chance to receive the support that would help you get to a better place.
Yeah, it's true. There's value in speaking to people who've gone through your journey and give them hope, right? One of the things I don't usually talk about, though, but there's an organization called Pasan, who actually hire people who have lived experience or living experience with addiction, and they employ them. And they actually are the ones who go around picking up the harm reduction items on the streets and track how much they pick up. I mean, that's tangible, employment, of people who are struggling on the periphery, right? So there's so many things we're doing that the public is not aware of. But again, these are real people, and you have to treat them as such. And they are trying, right? And sometimes, you know what, in life, you may start an initiative like addiction recovery. You may fall off the wagon, and then you hop on again, right?
Yeah.
But at least give them the opportunity to do that. I think the SCS closures actually really takes away a tool from the toolbox when it comes to helping people. I am a firm believer in that. You help people where they're at, not where you want them to be, right? And I think the province has been out of touch when it comes to addictions and mental health.
Which is a shame. You'd think that Doug Ford, having a family member of his, that he would maybe be a little more empathetic. We've covered, I think, 3 issues which are maybe buzzy, get a lot of media focus. We've spoken about public health, we've spoken about transportation, we've touched on housing a little bit as well. As councillor, though, I think you have, I would imagine, a much more tangible understanding about what some of the issues going on in the city are today. Do you think there are any issues that you're looking at right now which you think aren't getting the sort of media attention that they deserve? What are some of the things coming across your desk that you wish were more of a part of the public conversation that might not be right now?
I mean, I sit on 31 boards and committees.
Yeah, so there's a lot of them.
So there's a lot. I sit on budget and economic development and, again, public health and others, right? Those are the big ones. But it's not glorified, fancy, but it's sitting at the table, talking to senior leadership, trying to, get things moving. Maybe one of the things that the public is not aware of is I also sit on the Association of Municipalities for Ontario, and I'm the Toronto caucus chair for that.
Yeah.
And so talking to other mayors from across the province about issues that impacts them, right?
Something thanks for bringing this up, because I think something I get frustrated by sometimes is that we talk in any city government or any government period as though we're the only people facing this as an issue. Yeah. And we need to come up with a completely novel solution. But the beauty of cities and municipalities, and why I'm so obsessed with them, is because they're these perfect little natural experiments. And I think not often enough do we look at what is happening in other cities, what approaches, and what can we learn from them. And I think that organizations like the Association of Ontario Municipalities must be so critical for those sorts of skill development, even just like how to be an effective councillor, but also what is working well at other cities. When you look at other cities in Ontario, do you see any projects, any initiatives that you find inspiring that you wish Toronto would adopt? But also, fair enough, if you want to say that at Toronto we're number one, everyone should be learning more from us.
Yeah, well, ironically, a lot of my colleagues, from across the province, actually ask me as to what we're doing in Toronto, and they look to us, as a measure for best practices for doing things, especially when it comes to addictions and mental health and housing people, right? And so when I speak at those tables, I speak with authority, and they actually listen, and they actually have implemented some of those things I've mentioned. But some of the non-sexy things we're talking about there is an example of development charges.
Oh, this is... I'm all about the non-sexy stuff. That's what this podcast is for. Tell me about development
charges, right? So, a lot of other municipalities are quite upset with what the province has done in regards to DC charges, right? And how it's impacted, their infrastructure, their sewage and water and all these things. And the province has taken that tool away from them, and so they're really struggling. Toronto, of course, it also impacts us as well, right? to a lesser extent because we have our own deal with the province, but still it does impact us nonetheless, right?
And it's a short-term thinking where maybe we are speeding up development, but what effect is that going to have on our infrastructure going forward? You know, I very briefly lived in Calgary. My joke that I make often, I lived there 2022 to 2025, and I say that I felt like I moved to East Germany like a week before the Berlin Wall went up. And a big thing that they suffer from, I think in part because they're low density as well as just, you know, not taxing people enough, are these constant infrastructure crises. You know, about every year now they have a water main break and things flood. And I think that it's very difficult for people, because we all have short memories, to recognize that, to put those two and two together and saying, you are experiencing this infrastructure collapse, not because, you know, God has smited you. Well, you know, maybe, but because you have made decisions that are based in the short term, and, you know, the bill's going to come due eventually. And the worry when you see things like the development charges not being required in Ontario is, you know, what are those crises that might happen 20 years down the line? But because, you know, it's got, you know, 500 different fathers in terms of policy decisions, it's very hard to attribute, well, this crisis happened due to this. What is your relationship with the Conservative government of Ontario right now? Do you and Ford, you guys get coffee? You two hang out or not?
No, we don't get coffee. But again, you know, I'm in a unique position at the table because of my role at AMO. So again, I sit on the executive of AMO, and on that executive, a lot of the surrounding municipalities, my colleagues are Conservatives, right? So here I am, you know, the kid from Toronto, and everybody else, you know, is from rural, the north, and elsewhere. And so they may feel I'm maybe a little too progressive. They may not say that out loud, but I know they think it. But I bring things to the table they normally would not, right? So, but I respect that they at least listen, right? Also, as a member of the executive, I also sit at the MOU table. And so it's actually legislated that the province sits with the MOU table once a month.
The MOU would be...
The MOU is, well, it's MOU, it's a...
Memorandum of...
Understanding. Yeah, so it's an AMO, Memorandum of Understanding.
So what is that committee? What's the focus there?
So at the MOU table, the executive of AMO meets with the ministers. So Minister Flock is the rep, because he's the municipal affairs of and housing for the province. So he co-chairs the table with the president of AMO, and he's usually accompanied by other ministers, other ministers. And so we bring... Not Alexa Gilmore, though. No. So we bring our concerns to them, and they share their agenda with us, all in the code of secrecy, which I can't even discuss that with the mayor or anybody else.
So that's what the MOU refers to. It's the confidentiality.
Yes.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So I can't even discuss it ever. So you know, it's interesting because we see the legislation before it actually tabled, and so we can provide feedback as AMO.
That's very interesting.
So I mean, we provide them with feedback, but it's an interesting dynamic, right? Yeah. So my point being, I do use those tables and others to amplify some of the concerns in Toronto and across the...
You know, we've touched on a lot of heavy topics. Wrapping up, you know, Toronto's not all about problems. There's actually a lot of joy and a lot of exciting things. You know, we're past halfway through summer. Or, you know, I mean, in this current climate, maybe summer's going to go to like October this year. Who knows?
Yes, exactly.
Are there any, you know, exciting cultural events happening in Toronto Centre? Are there maybe any kind of hidden gems you'd want to shout out? Like, what's something you're looking forward to in Toronto right now?
I mean, there are many hidden gems in Toronto. The great thing about Toronto is there's just many great festivals in the city overall. And because of our diversity, you know, we get to, you know, a flavor of different cultures and places.
Did you
right?
hear, obviously my show name is a reference to Nirvana, the band, The Show. And Matt Johnson, the director, said, Toronto, we have the third best food in the world for everything. We have the third best ramen. We have the third best sushi. and I think, it's kind of true. We also have the best of the many things.
Yes.
But we also just have like not the best of everything, but very good for whatever cuisine you want.
Yes, yes. You know what? I live in Cabbagetown. I swear on Parliament Street.
Oh.
I think some of the best restaurants are in Parliament
Absolutely.
Street, right? So I eat out way too often.
I think Cabbagetown might be a hidden gem in Toronto as a neighborhood.
It really is. It really is. I mean, like, I encourage people to come to the Cabbagetown Festival in September, but also to go to Allen Gardens and check out the conservatory there as well. Check out Riverdale Park, right? And Riverdale Farm. Yeah. The first zoo, Toronto Zoo location. So there's a lot of great hidden gems in Toronto Centre. I mean, I haven't even mentioned, the St. Lawrence Market yet. Yeah. Or Berksey Park. A lot of great things in Toronto Centre. So come on down and check it out.
Chris Moise, I so appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Yeah. Is there anything you don't want to leave the audience with before we wrap up today?
The city is an amazing place all year long, but it's also more amazing in summer months. But I also want to say, too, that, it's also a safe city. The stats have shown that, right? And more people are coming here now than ever before, and come and use transit.
Councillor Moise, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Toronto The Politics The Show. If you like this show, please give us a follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to cool podcasts. You can find us on Instagram at TorontoThePoliticsTheShow or myself at Christopher Chiasson. If you have any questions for the show or if you'd like to get in touch, TorontoThePoliticsTheShow at gmail.com. Please leave a review if you like the show. I make this little thing all by myself, and whenever I hear any sort of feedback, it is legitimately very helpful for me to understand what people are looking for out of this project. My name's Christopher Chiasson. It's just me doing this. Have a great day. And one more thing, I would really appreciate it if you would post this podcast to r/Toronto. I posted the first few episodes to that subreddit on Reddit, and people really liked it. But then the moderators got angry at me because Reddit mods they're an interesting group of people. So yeah, if you think this is an important conversation that you'd like more people to share, post it on Reddit, post it on Tumblr, post it on 4chan, post it on the dark webs. Send it to your grandmother. Send it to your girlfriend. Send it to your boyfriend. Send it to your polycule. Send it to your dog. End of list.